Good morning.
Good morning, Michael.
Good morning.
Good morning,
Michael.
Good morning, Michael.
Good morning. So it looks like we have a little overcast outside, so that means we can work even more so inside, right? So the good news is we have some new things that we want to take a look at, and some of them are old things as well. We're just going to kind of rehash a few things before I send you to Cengage. So I'm going to jump into that. Let me just pull this aside. There we go. And fantastic. Let me just set that up. So can you see my screen right now?
Yeah. Yes.
Yes.
Fantastic.
Yes.
So I'm using the file that I've sent you. So this is the student sample file. And what we're going to do today is we're going to look at a few different characteristics about cells, because sometimes understanding how the cells function is actually very important to us. I kind of alluded to this before, but I'm going to go back to it again very quickly. So I'm just going to jump to a fresh sheet for a moment, sheet number 3. And I'm just simply going to type in a value. So 1, 2, 3 decimal, we'll say 002. Okay, there we go. So this particular number, we can see that it's general. And I've already indicated that whenever you have a decimal and a 0, the 0 won't show up unless there is a number greater than 0 past the decimal place. In that case, I have a number 2 here. But if I remove that number 2, general will not show me the decimal 00. So I'm just going to accept that, and you notice what happened. It actually takes that decimal 00 out. So what I probably want to do is to change the format. Now we could change it up here where it says number on the home tab. And there are many different possibilities here. I can open that up by using that drop-down arrow and take a look at all the different ways of structuring. Now, I think in one particular situation on your project, it asked you to insert some information. And some of you may have gotten it wrong simply because you didn't look at the formatting of it. The formatting in that particular case was custom. And inside of custom, there was a custom way of entering, let's say, dates. Even though you can type the date in, it may not accept it because it wasn't based on some formula here, such as general, number, currency, or custom. So that was an interesting part. So this means that sometimes we need to identify what kind of content can fit into a cell. Now I already have a decimal and I have 2 zeros after it, but I can't see it unless I choose a different format, such as, let's say, number. If I choose number, it automatically has a decimal and at least 2 digits by default. So I'm just going to open that up and I'm going to use, well, there's several ways. Number one, I could use this little dialog at the top here on the ribbon, okay, and go through these, and there's a few of them, and there's also more formats. Or I can use the little drop-down arrow here, which will open up the number scheme as well. Or I can right-click on that cell and go down to Format Cell. So there are several different ways of approaching the same thing. And it just simply means that I can now modify it. And it gives me a sample as to what it would look like if I decided to choose something else. Now, no matter what I choose here will have no impact until I click on OK. So if I click on number, it says that I can have 2 decimal places, or I can change that to whatever I want. So maybe I want to put in more decimal places. Look at all the decimal places. So you can put as many as you need in here. In most cases, in current let's say, accounting or things of that nature, it's only around 2 decimal places. Unless you're in a financial company where there may be 6, 8, 20, 30, 40. Again, depending on the kinds of money or the sizes of volume of money that they deal with. So all the numbers down here that you see in this negative number area is the way that you could actually represent a negative number. Now, it could be just black text with a little negative sign, or it could be red text, or it could be red text with a negative sign. There are different ways of representing a negative number. So if I choose with the negative symbol in front, this actually allows me that when I type in a negative number, it'll appear as red with a small number in front of it. And I can do, or a small dash in front of it. We can also use this little delimiter, which is a separator for thousands. It'll automatically put in a comma here simply because we added in. So I'm going to add it in so that I can play with the numbers a little bit. And you'll see that your negative numbers show you that every 1,000 there will be a comma as well. There are other things here we talked about earlier, which was currency. And currency by default is also 2 digits, but you can change that. So if I apply currency, there we go, we can actually see that right here, there is a dollar symbol. But that symbol doesn't have to be a dollar symbol. So let me just go back in here again. There we go. It could actually be a totally different symbol. Maybe what I want to use is a euro symbol. So I could actually go down here and find the country that I'm interested in demonstrating and use that symbol. So here's England. Where's England? England, Ireland, and they're using the euro. So if I click on that and click OK, it now changes the symbol, and therefore, every time I use this particular cell, it'll always have the same symbol. But the other thing that's important for us to remember here is that it only affects that one cell unless I choose a number of cells, in which case I can then apply a different format to those particular cells. For instance, if I chose to put in accounting, then when I type a number in here, 1, 2, 3, and we'll say decimal, and we'll just put a couple of zeros. And as soon as I press tab to accept what I've just entered, it automatically changes it to accounting. And remember I said yesterday, accounting is always on the left-hand side, the symbol for the monetary value, whereas in currency, it's always right beside the number itself. So let me just change this again, and we'll change it to currency, and I'll change it back to the dollar symbol. Okay, so there we go. But it could be any particular currency you're looking at. And sometimes you are preparing information that may use, let's say, the Japanese yen, or it may be the euro, or it may be the something else entirely. Whatever it happens to be, you can actually put that symbol into your particular spreadsheet. But it's a really nice feature to be able to come in here and make adjustments, such as whenever I click on a cell, it'll always tell me what kind of formatting is in that particular cell. And since you and I have just discovered we could actually take a whole series of cells and then just simply change them to something else entirely. So if I actually put in here a date, we'll say the long date, and I now type in a number, let's say 44,000. Remember I told you before that when you have a number, it can be converted because it is a Julian date. It can be converted in Excel to a date. So there's a date that 44,000 represents. Remember, number 1 will always be January the 1st, 1900. And today's date, if I wanted today's date, I can actually type that in here. So we'll say equal, and I'll put in today. And this is a little formula for you. Today, and there is no argument whatsoever. So inside the bracket, and this is where the argument would go. Remember sum, we had to put in what the sum was to be, in other words, the argument. In this case here, there isn't any, so we just open and close the bracket and then press enter, and it gives us the date. So now it actually puts in the date. And if I wanted to be able to add and subtract these to find out how many days have elapsed between the two, I could do that underneath this. I could actually create a little tiny formula. Again, equal. Now, some of you are typing in the actual reference for the cell. So you don't have to do that. What you can do is simply click on it. Since I have the equal sign there, it's waiting for me to type something in. So I'm going to just click on B3, and it automatically puts it in. And then I'll put in subtract, which is a little dash. And then I'll click on the other cell I want to subtract from it, which is this one. And when I press enter, because this particular cell is date, it will actually show me a date, and I don't want that. What I want here is the number, so I can see how many days. So I'm just going to click on that, and I'm going to change the date to general. So I can see how many days have elapsed between June the 18th and September the 2nd. So this is a really nice feature, and I can come in here and modify this, say, wait a minute now, I'd like to have, a percentage. Well, I can see the percentage, or I can come in here and I can look at, let's say, something else entirely like time. We can have time here. This is the current timing that you could put in. We can change this as well. This is what it would equal for 70 some hours from now, I guess it is. And once again, general, so it shows us the actual thing. You just have to make sure that you have selected the cell and changed it to what you would like to have. Is there a reason for this? And the answer is absolutely. In the business community, it's always important to know how many days elapse between several dates. And instead of trying to figure it out by looking at a calendar, it's easier to have Excel do it instantaneously in a sense. So even if I change the date to another date, let's just say I decide instead of today to change this to September the 1st, well, I can type that in. I can put in September. Okay, and this will be the 1st. And I'll put a comma, 2020. And I can actually put that in instead. So that will change the actual date as well. So once again, we can use these, let's say, formats to determine what kind of content is actually going to fit into a particular cell. And I just want to go back here again, and we're just going to re-explore this for a moment because there's a lot there. Not only do we have the general, which really has no decimal points per se, number that can include as many as we want, but we also have dates that are different. And it's really important to recognize that in different countries and in different areas in those countries, the date may actually be a little different. In the United States, in certain states, they actually use year, month, day. And in other states, they use month, day, year. So it really depends on who you're communicating with and who is going to be looking at that and what kind of policy your company uses and what kind of date format they use. And once again, there are different types of expression for date because not everybody is in the year 2020 right now. There are countries in the world that are at a totally different year because they didn't start off with the BC AC. So they have a slightly different approach entirely. So you can choose the country. And once again, maybe different countries have something very different. Let's say Italy It should be basically the same, but there are other countries. Let's take this one here. Their date format is very, very different. And again, you could choose these. Japanese, for instance, is different again. So you could choose these based on what it is you're trying to represent. And of course, once you start looking at this, now I've chosen Japanese, it tells me I can use the Gregorian calendar, or I can use the Japanese imperial region. And if I do that, you notice this is not what you would expect to see. This is not the year 2000. This is H24. So again, you need to be aware of the fact that you have a lot of capability here, and you can actually change things rather dramatically. I'm going to go back to English Canada, and now I can pick and choose the type of date format I would like to see. So with 123, I should be able to get an interesting date. So let's just choose this one here.
I don't have an answer for that. Is there something else I can help with?
Okay. Fantastic. By the way, you may hear voices every so often. I have Siri here with my iPhone, but I also have Alexa, and she likes to interrupt every so often, and that's the Amazon. So here I've changed it to a date, and you notice that that particular number that I typed in, 123, equates to May the 2nd, 1900. So dates can be used to, and numbers can be used interchangeably. And that's a really nice feature because it means I have more control over what kind of information I want to display. And I'm just going to jump back here one more time. There we go. And the important part here is there are many different things, including time, date, time. We can actually choose how we want time to be represented. You can also do percentages. Now be mindful of percentages because here you notice it says 123, which means it's an integral number. And therefore, if I converted it to percentage, it would say 12300 decimal 00. And therefore it has 2 decimal places. But the question here is, why do I get that extra 2 zeros? And that's because it's an integral number. And we need to actually make sure that if we want a real percentage, we probably want to put a period before the 123. Which will make it less than 1, and therefore a percentage is a little bit more viable. Fractions is the same thing. You could see this as a fraction. So you can choose the type of fractioning that you want to break it down to. Maybe you want to break it down into hundreds or quarters or halves. You get to choose how you actually represent that cell. And scientific notation, some of you may end up working in a chemical lab or something of that nature where you're helping out or what have you. Well, in that case, you would be using exponential numbers on a scientific level. Text is another thing. Now, there are a couple of ways of representing text. I can either use this option, which means text, and this now changes that cell into text. So it doesn't function like, let's say, numbers. It still can be calculated, but it works in a different way. And to change that to text as well, we can do that in another way, and I'll show you that in 1 second. Special. Now, what if I wanted to do a telephone number? If I use telephone number, it will automatically put in the hyphens. I don't have to put them in. It will do it automatically. And social security number is the same thing. Now, here's the good news. You can create your own. So if there are special ways that you want information to be represented, maybe it's a product number that has a hyphen or it has a space or something of that nature, then you can actually create your own representation and it will actually create it for you. Every time you type, it will automatically do that. So I'm just simply going to change this to a telephone number so that I can demonstrate what I mean by this. I'm going to click OK. And we're just going to change this to a telephone number. So I'm going to remove that. And I'm going to type in 416, and I'll type in 123, and I'll type in 1234. Fantastic. And I'll accept it. And you notice it broke it down into a telephone number. So this is really nice because you can set this up so that you're typing information in and it's automatically formatting it for you. And that goes for driver's license. It goes for anything that you can consider that you would like to convert this into and make sure that that's associated throughout. So again, I could copy that formula down, that format, I should say, so that the format could be entered anywhere in here. The other thing is custom. And custom is where you get to play. These are all custom ways of doing something. And there are a lot of them here. What dates are here, for instance, if you needed to put in very specific, like hours, minutes, and seconds, or just hours and minutes, or you wanted to have the AM, PM come into it, depending on what hour it happened to be, and dates. And of course, there are lots of different possibilities here that have been set up for you. And if you choose them, as you type in a number, it automatically changes it for you. Just like the date represented itself with the hyphens, then the same thing is true here for custom. And you can create these yourself. So if you found that, oh, I need one very specific for my particular company, whatever it happens to be, maybe a product number or an extension number needs to be put onto the telephone number, then we could actually do it here. And then as we type, it'll automatically change it for us. So this is a really nice little area that we can experiment with or modify our particular documents with. One of the other things that we can do here too, and I've kind of mentioned this before, is use the alignment tool. And alignment is actually a very, very nice tool. I've got news for you. This is a really nice tool because I can decide how to, excuse me, how to align the actual text itself. Maybe what I want is to align it horizontally, or I want to align that particular cell in a very specific way. So let me give you an idea of what I mean. I'm just going to, well, let's remove this cell for a moment. There we go. I'm going to change it back to general just for a moment. This particular cell, I'm going to make it larger. So I'm just going to make this a much bigger cell. And now we can see it's quite interesting. It's a big, big, big cell. There we go. It's a nice big cell. Let's make it a little bit bigger. There we go. So this particular cell, A1, is quite large. And when I type something into it, let's just say I put in the number 2. You notice where number 2 goes, but when I accept it, it always moves to the right-hand side. Numbers will always appear at the bottom on the right-hand side. Now I'm just going to make that a little bit larger so that we can see the number more clearly. There you go. And you can see the binding box around that number. Let me just accentuate that a little bit. I'll just put a thicker border around it. There we go. So now we have a thick border that goes around that cell. So number 2 is on the right-hand side by default. If it's text, and I'm just going to convert this into text. Now, as I said before, you can either type text in, okay, by using this option, or just type it in. But I'm going to type a number, and I'd like the number to be text. And again, I'm going to put in number 2. So as I type in 2, I'm going to put in this mark first, and then I'm going to put in number 2. Oops. Be nice if they were the same size, right? So let's just bump that up a little bit. Fantastic. So this actually will now be text because of this tiny little exclamation mark. And what's interesting is that little mark is going to convert this from a number format to a text format. And we're going to discover that as soon as I press tab. There you go. So now when I click on this cell is now text. And how do I know it's text? Because by default, text always appears on the left-hand side of the cell. And it's always at the bottom. But that's a default value. So let's take a look at that again. Here's my number 2. In fact, I'll change the color so we know this is the number. And the other one, we'll change that to blue so that we know that that's the text. And with the number, I have 9 positions that this could actually be in. It can either be by default on the right-hand side, but if I go up to the Home tab and I go up to Alignment, I have the choice of, number 1, all of these little icons here. There are 6 icons. So this means 3 by 3 gives me a total of 9 different positions. It can be at the bottom, it can be in the middle, it can be at the top, it can be at the left side, the middle, or the right side. So this gives me 9 separate positions that it could actually hold. So if I put this in the middle, and I put it in the middle again, then it's now in the middle, and I have space underneath it and space above it and to both sides. So I could actually put it on the left side in the middle or at the top on the left side. So you have 9 separate positions that this could actually fit into. And you get to choose where that positioning is actually going to be. So you get to actually realign this somewhat. And there's a really good reason for it. You may need to actually structure this so that it's very unique in a sense. Let's just make it 782. So this is a number in the middle, and yet I have text here that's starting on the left-hand side. And yet I can move the text around too. If I want it to be in the middle, and if I want to put it in the middle, I can do that as well. So you have a lot of latitude here as to how you situate this. I'm just going to move it back here to the left for a moment, because we actually have 2 other icons which are really important. One is to decrease an indent, and the other one is to increase. What an indent means is I pushed it in a little bit. I've given myself a little extra space, so I can just kind of move it over a little bit. I can click again, move it over a little bit more. If I were trying to align this very specifically, I could do that by just simply clicking on this and moving it. And this is like tabbing, okay? And I can use the other one to go backwards again. So if I want to reduce the amount of space, I can do that. One of the other things here that can also be done inside of a cell is we may decide to change the direction of it. Now I'm just going to type in a couple of extra numbers here with 2 so that we can actually see that there is the potential of a direction. Okay, so let's just take that. I'm going to leave them the size they are at the moment. And I'm simply going to jump back in here, take a look at it, and then I'm going to modify its angle. Now, there are several ways of doing this. This particular approach means I can change the direction of the text itself. And as I mentioned yesterday, you can often see this, especially when you go to a plaza or you go to a grocery store and you're looking at the bulletin board where people are trying to sell different things. You can often see that the telephone numbers are in a straight line. Well, we can do that as well here, vertical. And I can make this vertical for this cell, but it doesn't affect any other. Remember, only the cells that are currently selected will be modified. So this is still selected, and I can see that with the little green binding box around it. And I can come back in and say, wait a minute, now I'm not too keen on that. I'd prefer this. Okay, so now it's on an angle. Or maybe I don't like that, so I'll switch the angle and go the opposite direction. There you go. So now I've got that angle. No, I don't like that either. So let's do it this way. Okay, so there are many different approaches to setting up the angles here. In fact, we can even decide we'd like to set up by a specific degree. And this is by 15-degree increments. So maybe I want 15 degrees. So I'll click OK. And now I have 15 degrees from this cell here. And of course, I can go back in there and I can change that, or I can click on the little drop down. And again, I can decide, well, wait, I'd rather put it back to where it was, so it's 0. Since it's highlighted, I could have just simply typed in 0. This one here is nice too, because this one suggests that the text will follow a very specific pattern. And if I click OK, you'll notice that it goes all the way down, but it's not the same thing as using this option. Okay, this option is a little different. This option, the number will be turned over on its side, and you can see it's over on its side. Whereas the other option actually allowed me to have the numbers one on top of the other, so you could still read them very easily. And again, this would be great for telephone numbers or something that you wanted to append your document with, where they're vertical. So this allows me to make some rather significant changes. And if I use this drop down, I can actually come in here and change it again. Just turn it off. And over here it says, how do you want to align it? And do you want to indent it? Well, we were just using the icons, but we can do that from here as well. Maybe I just want it to be general. And maybe I want it to be at the bottom, or I want it to be somewhere else. So once again, it could be the top, it could be the center. And again, you can do it from here, or you can use the little icons here on the ribbon. Either way will work just perfectly. Now, there are some other little nuances here. There is, and let me just take a look here. We have the word wrapping. This is wrapping text within the actual cell itself. Remember I said day number 1 that there are 65,000 cells here, 65 little rectangles, and each one is totally independent of the other. And each one of them, until you type in, are transparent. They really allow the text behind it to show through until you type something into it. I'll demonstrate that again. So wrap text, I should say, is a function that allows me to type in a lot of text, but be able to wrap it inside of the cell itself. So let's do that. I'm just going to create a new cell here. Here's C. Fantastic. And I'm going to make C just a little bit small, just a tiny bit smaller there. And I'm going to type in my name. There you go. So there's my name. And you notice it's covering several different columns. And when I click on Tab to accept the value, it automatically shows me that D is now transparent because there's nothing typed into it. As soon as I type into it, it automatically becomes, let's say, opaque, and you can no longer see through it. So the name underneath, which is still in C1, C1, is actually strewed across here, and we can see a little tiny bit of it. Let me just, let me just pull that across a little bit, and there we go. So you now notice that it's hiding it. It's layered on top of it. So how do I see the full name? Well, one of the easiest approaches, of course, we talked about before, was simply to double click the line between C and D, and that would widen it. Or I could go to Format, and I could choose to auto fit, or I could type in a value if I wanted to. But there is another approach here, and that was the wrapping. So I'm just going to come back here. Now I can't see the last name, so the easiest approach would be to wrap the text inside the cell. So let's just go back in here. There we go. And I'm going to click on that because I've I need to select that cell first. So there we go. Now the cell is selected, and I can now come back in here and I can choose wrap the text. And now I can click OK, and look what it did. It automatically started to wrap the text inside of the cell itself. So this is actually a useful tool as well, because within Excel, many companies actually use some of the cells to put instructions or information as to what values mean. They may actually put a little bit of documentation in. So it's nice to be able to wrap it rather than have it literally string across in the background where you can't read it. The only way I could read it, of course, is to click on that cell, and then on the formula bar, we can actually see what's in the cell. But even that is a problem, because if it keeps going for a little while, then you're going to be hiding some of that text as well. So that's an interesting approach too, is to be able to wrap the text. Now you'll notice here there's another one called shrink the text. So I'm just going to unclick that, and I'm going to look at shrink. Well, shrink is a fascinating thing, okay? And I'm going to shrink this text. So I click on it, and I'm going to click OK. And you notice it got really small here so that it fits basically the size of the cell. But here's the nasty part of that. If I make this cell even smaller, so too does the text get smaller. And when you go to print something, you may find you have a lot of small print, especially for certain cells that are shrinkable. I would suggest you're very careful with this, simply because it will try to shrink to the size of the actual cell itself. So the smaller and smaller I get, the smaller and smaller that text is down there, and it's getting smaller and smaller so that it fits the cell, no matter how big that cell happens to be. Of course, you can read that, right? So you may actually want to make sure it's large enough so that you can actually read it. So shrinking text is not a bad thing. It's just that you have to be mindful that when it comes to printing, it could be a big issue. So I'm going to turn that off. The other thing is we kind of explored a little bit, which was the merging of a cell. For instance, let's just say that H did not contain any information. And I wanted to be able to, let's say, have all the content within this cell and this cell and this cell all shared as one giant cell. But below it would still be independent cells. I'd still have 3 separate cells. But here I'd only have 1. Well, I can merge that text. So I can either use the drop down here for the alignment, or I can use this particular option here. And this allows me to do 3 different approaches. Number 1, I can merge the 3 and center the text in the middle. The second approach is I can merge across, which means it'll still start from the left-hand side. It won't move to the center. And the third one is it'll just merge the cells, and wherever the text is and wherever I type it, that's where it's going to stay. So I'm simply going to merge across. There you go. So now I have 1 cell, and I can see with this green binding box, it is in fact 1 cell. Let me just shift this up a bit, and I can see underneath we still have 3 separate cells. So this is actually nice if you want to put a title, and the title has to, let's say, cover several different columns to be able to merge them. And it doesn't have to be at the beginning. So I could actually drag this down a couple of lines, and you'll notice that now the first row is back to being 3, and this one is now 3. Again, you have a lot of latitude here as to how you set it up. Since I set it up as a merged cell, it will remember it's a merged cell. So in this case here, and once again, I can still come back to these icons, and I can move it in the middle if I want to. I can change its color if I want to as well. So there are a couple of other little features here as well, and I just want to take a look at those. So I'm going to come into this cell and I'm going to type in 123 decimal 1234. There we go. And right now, lots of elements here on the tab, on the ribbon are not available to me simply because remember that insertion point is flashing inside the cell, which means the only thing you can change is the font at this point, the entry that you've typed in. But as soon as I press tab, it accepts the value and now I can click back on it and I have everything available because I'm dealing with the entire cell, which means I can change all the elements. And up here, we just want to take another look up here because we have a dollar symbol. I could just simply change this to, let's say, a currency, and this is actually accounting, by the way. You do have many options here as well. But you can also change it to, let's say, for instance, I could change it to a percentage, or I could simply put a comma in between all the numbers, especially where they are into the thousands. Now, we don't have one here, so I'm going to add a couple of decimals. Add a couple of numbers here, 4, 5, and 6. So this means I should now have, and let's put in 7 too. There you go. So now we're in the millions, and I'll just get rid of the decimal for a moment. So now we have a million, and how do I can put different elements into that? There we go. So now it's actually defined, and it's got the commas in here as well. So let me change it back to general. And if I put comma, it automatically switches it to another format. Now I could have used number, for instance, and then put in that comma, and it will separate it by the thousands. So every 3 characters, it'll put a comma. Every 3 characters, it'll put a comma. So this is 1,234,567, and it would be nice if those were dollars. Super duper. So the beautiful thing here about the formatting of a cell is that we have the ability to modify what kind of information is represented within a particular cell. We can decide how that information is represented, such as, let's say, how many degrees that information, where it's situated within the cell itself. But we can also do some other things here. So I'm just going to make sure that that cell is a little bit more visible. So let's just go back here. Whoops. There. It would be nice if it stayed where I want it to stay. Ah, nasty. Okay. Well, let's hope it stays the way it is. There we go. Okay, let's take these dates then. And I can actually come in here, and there's several ways of doing this. By the way, here I can change the border. I can make it thicker. I can put a line above, below, on the side of it. So I'm just simply going to put a line at the top. There we go. So now I have a line at the top. And of course, when I look at this, I see that there is a line at the top of the 2 cells that I chose, and it's a deeper line. So let's just go back in here and modify that again. I'm going to change the color so that we can see that the borders can actually be recolored. I can put 2 lines underneath. So let me put 2 lines underneath. I'll click away, and you can actually see the 2 lines here as well. Let me just go back here, and I'll go to customize. So we can actually customize this as well. We can decide how we want to set it up. And by the way, you can create your own borders. You can draw them in if you want to. And you can even change the color of the line, and you can change what kind of a style. So let's do that. Let's just put a weird looking style in here. There you go. And as I draw my line here, I can actually put a border in anywhere I want that border to be. Maybe I'll just change this one here. So now I can change those as well, and I can change the color of it. So just jumping in here and going down to line color, I'll make it red this time, And let's change that one to red. We'll change this one to red. And we'll change this one to red. And we'll change this one to red. And your boss will fire you. Fantastic. They'll wonder, what are you doing all day? I'm changing the line to red. Super stuff. There you go. So we could change it all here, or we could actually go back to our little dialog box and go to borders. And here we can change it. Now, it's already discovered that the cell I'm on has a red border at the top, and it has a black border on the side. But I could turn that off. And then, of course, I can turn this one off, and I can turn this one off because they're highlighted. And I'll just leave the top one on, but I'd like the top one to be thicker. So I can choose a thicker side to it, just click on it, and I can change the color. So let's make it green this time. There you go. So now I'm just going to click again to turn it green, click OK. I'll click away, and there's my green line. So I can use the borders that are associated here as well. And this also gives me some rather interesting characteristics where I can decide what kind of border, because remember, we can turn off all the borders except for the ones we created. So all of those little rectangles you see here, they all have a little gray line around them, but we can turn the gray line off and leave the lines that we put in. So you can actually create things that are rather interesting and well designed. Let's just turn that back off. So I'm just going to turn them off totally. And we can also fill this as well. Now, this area, and I'm just going to come back in here really quickly. I'm going to go to my basic screen, and I'm going to choose just the names. And I'm going to come in here and I'm going to modify that. So once again, I'm going to choose my dialog box. There it is. And I'm going to go to fill. Now I can fill what I want, and I can even put a pattern in here as well if I want to. That's why you have two different swatches here. So the first one, I think I'll make it a lightish, well, let's make a lightish kind of turquoise color. So there you go. There's a light turquoise color. And I might decide, well, I'd like to have a pattern on top of that. So maybe I'd like to have, well, let's try this one here. So these are thin lines. I can use thin lines. Actually, I'll do it the opposite direction. There you go. And it will show me this here. Of course, the black is a little bit on the intrusive side, so I'll make it a dark green. How's that? So we can see, well, maybe you can't. So let me go back to the darker color. I'll say dark blue. There, now you can see green in the background, and you can see the dark blue lines on it. So if I click OK, that's exactly what it ends up filling this area with. So I can actually put different colors in here besides just throwing the paint can in, such as I want yellow. Well, it just replaces the background, but not the lines. So again, I can come in here and I can go to fill, whoops, fill, and I can turn that off if I want to. So in other words, I can say I want it to be just ordinary and I don't want any lines in there at all. Let's just turn that off totally. So I'll put in white. Fantastic. And of course, we can then remove the color in the background. Fantastic. Isn't that exciting? Wow. Awesome. And I'm just going to come back in here again to fill. So fill, you can also have different effects as well. So you may find that maybe what you want to have is a gradient. And of course, I could choose any color I want. So I'm going to choose orange here. There you go. And I have several choices. It can be from the top down. It can be from the bottom up, or in the middle, or on an angle. So there are many different ways of looking at this, and you can choose whichever approach you think is going to be the best for you. And again, you have lots and lots of possibilities that you can choose from. So I'm going to choose here vertical. Let's take horizontal instead, and I'll take it from the top down, and I'll still use my orange, but I'm going to use a very, very light orange as well. So let's use that light orange, make it a darker orange here. There we go. Well, it's not even orange, is it? And I'll click OK, and I'll click OK. And there you go. So now I have something that looks like this. Again, you have lots of latitude here as to how you set it up. Piece of cake. Super duper. So there are a couple of other things I wanted to explore as well this morning. And one of the other things that you can actually play around with a little bit is how calculations are done. Now, we talked about the sum, and I'm just going to zoom up a little tiny bit here. And I'm just going to reduce my ribbon so that we can see it more clearly. There are many different formulas that can be used. As I pointed out, there are literally thousands of them. We could have added these all up, but I could also do something else. I could look for an average. Not only can I count how many actual cells there are, by the way, count doesn't work with the text. There is a secondary kind of count. As I said before, there are many different variations of the same formula. We could sum these up by adding them up, or we could do some other functions to it as well. But what if I wanted to know the average? Sometimes the average is actually to your advantage. So I'm going to put an average in here. I'll put in equal. And remember, there are several ways. Anytime I type in an equal, it's going to expect me to put in a calculation of some kind. And I could simply put in by clicking on cells and then simply add that cell or subtract or multiply or whatever I want to. I'm not going to actually do it that way. Okay. But I can also come up here to the insert a function. And in this case, I can look for average. Well, there's average. By the way, the ones that come up the most recently used are the ones that are most recently used. And most likely, they're the ones that are most often used. So there are many different formulas here as well. By the way, all will show you all of them alphabetically. And as I said, as you draw this down, you'll find there's lots of variations here. So in this case here, we are going to explore many of these, especially on Friday. But right now, I want to take a look at average because I'd like the average. And once again, I want you to remember something. Whenever you click here, it'll automatically tell you how the information must be entered. So here I have an average requires that you put in either a range, remember that colon, or you put a comma, which means that it is one number added to the next number, added to the next number, etc. And that's with a comma, or range with a comma, another range with a comma, etc. So in this case here, I'm going to click OK. It's going to look at all the numbers above it, which it just did. It discovered, wait a minute, now I've got all these numbers up here. So I decided to accept them all. And therefore, it tells me that the common number among these, the average number in the middle, is basically going to be 547. And it shows me down here, the formula result will be this. So if I click OK, that's what I should end up with. And of course, you notice that since the cell is still selected, I can see in the formula bar what information has currently been typed in. So it shows me the formula on the formula bar, but it shows me the end result in the cell itself. And I also showed you two ways of seeing the formula. So this is number 3 up here, but there's two other ways. This one was double click on the cell with the formula, and it will show you the formula. It will even show you the syntax, in other words, how it has to be typed in. And it will show you by highlighting the area that it's actually calculating. So this was a nice feature. And if there were 2 or 3 different areas, they would be different colors so that it would show you how they affect one another within the formula. Because sometimes you can have a formula that doesn't work very well. So let me give you another example. Here, I want to do one other thing here. I'd like to do a count. Okay, so here's count. And remember, when you type in the word count, or you go up here to insert formula, you'll have many different kinds of count. Each one has a very different purpose. The count if, for instance, requires that there's criteria. Maybe you only want to count if it's within a certain range. In other words, don't count them if they're under 10. Don't count them if they're over 50. Whatever you want to put as a condition. And of course, the S means that it's going to be text. And of course, we can go on decount, etc. So in this case, what I'm going to do is put a bracket because there is an argument. And the argument is, what do I want to count? So I'm going to count this entire column. And there should be 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 rows. There are 10 rows, 10 numbers, and therefore it should come up with 10. So let's just click, drag it down. There you go. So from E5 to E14. And by the way, all I did was click on the cell, hold the left button of the mouse, and drag it down. Why type it in if the machine can do it for you? And then close the bracket, and I'll press, in this case here, either enter or tab. And I'll press tab because I want it to be jumping from one cell to another. And there we go. So I'm just going to color that cell so that we can see it a little bit more clearly. There you go. So right now, that cell says there are 10 different numbers here. But what would happen if, and this is kind of an important area, it has to do with how the actual functions work. So I'm going to do this again, but I'm going to remove, well, let's remove this one here. I'm going to press delete. And you notice it says 9. Now, the only reason it says 9, and I'm going to open this up, is because we already put in that range. But if I actually wanted to insert this formula, so I'm going to remove the formula. I want to put this formula back in, but this time instead of typing it, I'm going to insert it. And you're about to discover that this is one of the things that you have to be aware of. This is why there are so many different kinds of count, because some of the counts can actually recognize that there is a space. What's going to happen with almost all formulas is when they hit a space, they're going to say the data has completed and there is no other data to be added to it. So you and I know that when we actually inserted count and there was a number in here, it went all the way to the top and it selected everything. But this time when I click on count as a variable that I'm entering, okay, it says, wait a minute now, there are no numbers above number 10. So here's row 10, and it's saying row 10 to row 14. So it's only taking what's at the bottom here. It's not taking anything above that space. This is really an important thing to remember, that formulas can only go as far as they are designed to go. So count, sum, and if, and a variety of other formulas, when they actually get to a space, they assume that that's the end of the data. So they don't go any further by themselves. But you and I also know that, wait a minute now, I could just simply highlight that and just do it myself. I could click and I could drag it down. And now it knows that it has to calculate all of them. So because I removed one, we had 10. So I know it's only going to be 9 in this case. But if I actually were to, let's say, enter it by default, which is just simply click on count, then it will only go as far as the space. So this is actually important, and I want you to remember that because sometimes students do make a mistake with this, or people learning this for the first time, that formulas, they're intuitive enough to be able to include the data you're looking for. But if there's a space, an empty cell, so to speak, they assume that that is the end of the data. And therefore, they don't try to jump the cell and go on to the next piece of the data, which, as we can see, there's still another 4 cells at the top here, but I can't see them because of that space. So just keep that in mind going forward, that there is that one little nuance that we have to be aware of. There's another thing here I really want to get across to you, and I definitely want you to make sure that your memory is working 150,000%, or you're writing it down. I showed you at the beginning that when I clicked on a cell, it automatically told me that this is A and it is 4. Okay, so I can see that A and this was 4. So this was the cell I wanted. And in the name box, it actually showed me A4. And I also showed you that when you're actually calculating something, like let's say the gross pay here, and I'm adding these together, it says that the 2 cells are actually added together. So this cell here and this cell here are added together. If I click on it, I can see those 2. But what would happen if I wanted to add these 2 cells? Okay, and there you go. I can add those 2 cells. But I'd also like to add what's below here. Okay, so I'd like to add what is actually below that particular cell. So I'm just going to come in here, and I'm going to copy that formula down. And it comes up with a 0. Why does it come up with a 0? Because there's nothing in those cells. And this is an important element because you notice that E is remaining the same, F is remaining the same, but it is now incremented the cell by 1 row. So it's now 15. So let me just clear that. We'll get out of that for a moment. There we go. And I'm going to introduce you to something a little different. There is a very big difference between the name of the cell, A and 4, okay, and it's called a relative. So remember this, a relative cell reference. That's the A4 because I'm clicked on A4. So it's called a relative. If I click on this cell, it says C6, and that is a relative reference to that cell. So when I was copying that formula down, it was copying the relative reference and it was adding to it, adding 1 additional row each time I pulled it down. But what if I don't want that to happen? So up here, many times companies decide to put in tax rates, or they intend to put in a percentage, and they want to calculate that percentage, but they don't want to keep typing it in. So what they use is called an absolute value, which means it can never increment. It never changes. It's always the same reference. And an absolute value has a dollar symbol in front of it. So I'm just going to type in, let's say we want to multiply everything by 2. So there's my 2. But here's the bad news. This 2, if I multiply it, so let's just put it over here. I'm going to say I want to multiply this 768 by 2. So you and I know that that's a piece of cake. Equal, and of course I just click on the 768, and that gives me G5, and that's a relative reference, and that can increment. And therefore I'm going to multiply it with an asterisk, and I'm going to click on number 2, okay, which is F2. And we can see that's a relative reference because there's no dollar symbols there. And when I press tab, it multiplies it. And when I copy it, we have a problem. Remember, when you went to school for the first time, they told you that when you multiply any number by 0, it's still 0. And the problem is it incremented. Let me show you what I mean by that. Look at what happened. The first calculation took the 2 and it multiplied it by this particular value. So these are relative references. And then when we copied that down to the other cell, it copied it down. But here, it also copied this one down. Instead of F2, it's now F3. So it incremented. So how on earth am I going to stop that from happening? The easiest approach is the F2 should become an absolute, which can never actually increment in any direction. And the easiest way of doing that, and I'm just going to go back to the original. Oops, let's just get rid of that garbage. Okay, just going back to this original one, and I'm just going to double click on it. You'll see it's F2. I'm just simply going to put my mouse in front so that the cursor is flashing in front of F2. And on the keyboard, now there are two ways of doing this. One is you just simply enter a dollar symbol in front of F, and you enter a dollar symbol in front of 2, which means, and remember this, the dollar symbol says if it precedes the column cannot be changed. If it precedes the row cannot be changed. So it cannot increment in either direction. So if I press F4 on the keyboard, this is the keys at the very top, F4 function key, then it will automatically put in the dollar symbols for me. There you go. So now I have dollar symbols in front of both. And by the way, if I press it a second time, it will take it away from the column and it will just add it to the row. So this means, yes, I could change it from F to G to H, but it cannot change the row. So it'll always be row number 2. And if I press F4 again, excuse me, it tells me that I can't move to G and I can't move to E, but I can move down the rows because the dollar symbol has been removed from the row. So I'm just going to press it again, turn it right off, and then press it again and turn it on. Now let's see what happens. So I'm going to just press enter. And now I'm going to copy that down and let's see if it really worked. So now 350 times 2 is 700 and 550 times 2 is 1,100. There you go. And how do I know that it worked? If I click on the formula, I can now see that the dollar symbol is still pointing to F2. And therefore, G6 has moved down 1. And if I go to the next row below that, let's just go to the next row, I can see it's still F2. So that's an absolute reference. That dollar symbol.
Michael?
Yep, go ahead.
So if you put that dollar sign just in front of the F and not a dollar sign in front of the 2, what would it do? Sorry, I'm confused about that part. I understand this, the $2 signs in there, using F2 as the reference, but if you just put $1 sign, what is it copying?
Okay, well, let's do that as well. Let me go back to a new sheet for a moment. So here we have a new sheet, and I'm just going to scale it up a bit so we see it more clearly. There you go. And I'm just going to put a reference in here. I'm going to say 2 again. Remember, it can be anything you want. And I'm going to do a calculation here. So I'm going to take this here. And I am just simply going to make a single cell so we can take a look at the response to it. So here I'm going to type in equal. And let's just zoom it up a little bit here as well. Whoops. Okay, just going to take it up so that we can see it a little bit more clearly. There we go. And we'll put it in the middle. Oops. I guess I should have done this a little earlier. There we go. Fantastic. Okay, so now I'll put in equal. whoops, and I'm going to say 10, okay? And I'm going to say multiply that by this value. So here's the conundrum. If I copy this cell down, it's going to take 2 times 10, and that'll give me 20. But what if I copied this formula sideways? So here's another situation. I'll copy it sideways. And now it says 0. Why does it say 0? Because when I click on it, it says it moved it across. Okay, there's no restriction on the column. But if I did that again, so let me just do it again. I'll pull it down. You notice it says 0 again. So if I click on that, it says, whoops, look what happened. Instead of being on this particular row, it moved down 1, 2, 3, 4. So that means 4 plus this one, that gives me 5. So it actually moved this down quite a bit. Now, that might not be a great way of looking at it, so let me just undo that for a moment. Okay, whoops, let's go back there again, sorry. Okay, zoom that back up again. Okay, so here I'll put in the number 2 again, and this time I'll take this cell and I'll put in 10. That'll help out a little bit. And I want to multiply these two together. So once again, equal, and I'm going to click on this cell because I want to show you the cells move. And I also want to multiply it by this cell. Okay, so when I actually press enter, I should get 20, correct? You still there? Okay.
Yes, yes.
Fantastic. So if I take that formula and I copy it down by dragging it down, okay, remember I'm using that little square to fill, it says 0. Well, how's that possible? Now watch what happens. If I look at this formula, it says these two cells are actually being referenced. But the moment I drag it down, it's going to go to this cell and it's going to go to this cell. It's going to increment by 1. So let's just open it up. There you go. So now it's gone down 1 cell here, and it's also dropped 1 cell here. So what would happen if I went sideways then? Well, unfortunately, it will increment the column by 1. So let's just do that. So I'll pull this sideways. There we go. And now it's 0. Why is it 0? Because number 1, we are multiplying. And when I open it up, it's showing me it's 20 multiplied by nothing. It's allowed the 2 to increment over to another column. So how can I stop that from happening? The easiest approach to stop it from happening, and let me just get rid of that formula again. The easiest way to make that happen, and let's get rid of that one, is to ensure that when I did this formula, I made sure that there was a dollar symbol in front of the column. So I'm just going to put a dollar symbol in front. Now remember, I can press F4 a few times. There you go. So now there's a dollar symbol. And when I, whoops, my apologies. I screwed that up. There you go. Let's put a dollar symbol back there again. So when I copy this across this time, and I go to the next one, I should get 2 times 20 because the 2 cannot move. It can't increment to another cell. And when I click on it, I can see, yes, it's still referencing this cell because the column is frozen. It cannot increment in either direction. But the cell can. Okay, so the row can. So the row can actually change. So if I drag this down, per se, okay, let's, whoops, again, I did it. Isn't that disgusting? Hold on. Fantastic. There you go. Okay, so if I drag this down, we get the same problem. And the same problem is simply because it's still focused on the same column. but the row can increment because there's no dollar symbol in front of it.
Okay, okay, I get it.
Do you get it? So
I
if I
do, thank you.
okay, so if I just change this and put a dollar symbol in front of the row as well, then when I copy it down, it'll remember that absolute reference. Oops, hold on. Okay, it'll remember the absolute reference so that when I open it up, it shows me that it's still connected to that particular cell.
Okay, that's a great feature. Thanks for sharing.
Okay. Piece of cake. Does anyone else have difficulty with that? So what I want you to remember is that that dollar symbol kind of freezes it. And no matter how you copy it, no matter where you put that formula, the original content will always be frozen in place. Yep, go ahead, Joyta.
Basically, Michael, so every time we freeze this, we have to put the dollar symbol in front of the row and the column number, right? The reference.
Yes, just
Or
for this.
it will not change. It will not take the same formula to go ahead, right?
That's
or to
right.
copy.
Yep.
All right.
For just that one cell.
Yeah. Okay. And so every time we put that, once we put the dollar symbol in front of the row and the column number, and we take the reference, and we can just move ahead like this, copy the same formula for the reference as a reference for the next row, right?
Yep, absolutely.
And it will stay. It will not change again, right?
It will not change.
Okay, I got it. I got it. Thank you, Michael.
Fantastic. So here's another thing for you, and we've talked about it before. Yes, we copied this formula down by just simply dragging using this little fill handle, but there is another way of doing this, and I've shown you in this as well. We can actually move the formulas around, and they will remember what they're connected to. So I just grab it on the line with a four-headed arrow, and I could move that information anywhere I want to. Now remember, it's actually shifting the formula around so that that information can then be placed anywhere I want it to be. It will affect other areas because they're associated with what is below and above that particular formula, but you do have the ability to move it around. Piece of cake. So just keep that in mind, that the dollar symbol using the F4 key on the keyboard, or you can type it in. But an absolute reference freezes that one cell that you're referencing, and it's just that you're referencing it. And that means that if it doesn't have a dollar symbol, it will increment when you copy it. Now, there's another thing here too that I want you to be aware of, and this is a beautiful little tool as well. Again, it was created to make your job easier. You may actually want to do something very specific, such as, for instance, and let me just get rid of what I just put in there. There we go. You may decide that you would like to, let's say, I'm going to select this entire little area we have, and you notice something happened. There's a little icon here. This is called the Quick Analysis Toolbar. Everything that can be done with it can be done from the ribbon. However, it just kind of makes it easy sometimes because it's preset. It's like little templates for you. When I click on it, I can decide, wait a minute now, I kind of like to format the cell a little bit so I can see how big is one number according to, let's say, a number on another row. Or I can change the colors of it. Certain colors will be low numbers and certain colors will be very high numbers. So the redder it happens to be, the lower it is, and the greener it happens to be, the higher it is. Or maybe I'd like icons instead. So it'll give me an indication of the higher numbers, the lower numbers, and I could go to actually challenge it. By the way, you can set these for yourself. So if I only wanted the top two, I could actually choose the top values. And in addition to that, I could clear whatever is in there. And because I've selected this little table, I can actually put a chart in here too. It'll actually build up a chart for me based on the data that is actually represented there. Now we'll be dealing with charts a little bit later, but the nice thing is here, it will create it automatically for you. You don't even have to think about it, which sometimes is a good thing. Depends on what time of the morning it is, okay? And the other nice thing here is, and I kind of like this feature a little bit, because it will actually sum it up for you. You don't even have to type in sum. Look at that. This is my table. I just selected it. I'm using the quick access toolbar, and here it says totals, and I go to sum, and it just plugs it all in for me. I don't even have to think. Not one brain cell functioning. And there's my average. If you want averages, there they are. And if I want it to count, it will count each one. There's only 10 rows there. And if I want percentages, it'll tell me the percentages. Running balances, it'll give me that as well. And of course, there are other formulas, such as at the end of the actual rows themselves, it'll give me the sums of those as well by adding each one of the columns together. And of course, there are other possibilities here. Running balances, totals, count, sum, average. We can have anything we really want here. It's really surprising that this tool is so powerful. And you know something else here, sometimes we want to be able to filter information. So if I click on table, then it says, wait a minute now, do you want to create a table? Well, this is what the table will look like. It's going to be, we can change the colors, by the way, as well. If I choose table, now I'm going to do this in a moment. I'm not going to do it just this second, but I will create a table out of this for you to show you what it looks like. This is fundamentally the little picture up here is what it's going to look like. Pivot tables we are going to deal with much later. This is a very advanced idea and a brilliant product. And of course, there are many different possibilities within a pivot table, and there are more possibilities as well. There's another thing you will end up coming in contact with, and that's called sparkle lines. It evaluates the information to determine, is it going up or is it going down? Sometimes when you're looking at, let's say, sales of a product, let's say you're a little retail store, and you want to know, are products going up or going down? Am I making more profit or, excuse me, less profit? Then using sparkle lines can actually help a little bit. So if I put this here, you'll see at the end, it actually puts this wavy line in, which shows you it's going up and it's going down and it's going back up again. And then, of course, we could use this instead. Each column is represented by a little column, or we can use this approach. And of course, there are other approaches as well, but this is a nice little feature that you can actually use as well. So let me just create a table because this is a beautiful function. A table allows me to filter. So I just clicked on it, and now I have a table. And the nice thing is there's these little drop-down arrows on each one of the columns. And the beautiful thing is here, I can filter or I can do something else. So let me just show you what I mean. I can click on this here. Now, let's look at it very quickly. I have a 38, I have a 39, a 37, a 29, a 35, but I have a number of 40s. And I'd like to just see the 40s. So I'll click on the little drop-down arrow, and I will unselect everything, and I'll choose just 40. And now I'll click OK. And now I only see 40. So all the information that's pertinent to the 40, that's all I see. I can always turn that back on. We'll select everything again. Or maybe I just want all the 30s. So I'll just, whoops, hold on. I'll get rid of these ones here. And I just want to see all the 30s. I don't want to see the 20s, and I don't want to see the 40s. And there we go. Now I see all the 30s. And if I want to see all of them again, I just click on select everything and click OK. And now I see all of it again. However, maybe I don't want to see all these zeros. So I can come in here and I can unselect everything and just click on 0. And now I only see zeros. Well, what if I don't want to see those, period? Well, now I can select everything but 0. So now there's no zeros. So this is actually making a table can actually help you scrutinize the information. Now, I'm not going to go into the filters because these filters can be extraordinarily powerful. We can really dig into data. We don't have very much data here, but I may want to sort too. Maybe I want to sort, so I can come back in here and choose. Let's just put everything back in again. Select. Okay. And I want to select this here, and I want to, let's say, put this in alphabetical order. Right now it basically is, but what if I wanted to reverse it? Okay, well, I can do that, Z to A. So as I click on it, everything in the table is sorted automatically according to just this one column. And if I want to sort it back, now there's another thing here to look at. That little drop down arrow has another arrow which shows me currently an operation has been effective on it. In other words, I've sorted it or I've filtered it. And if I click on this one, A to Z, then everything is now back to A to Z. And therefore, all the other columns are sorted accordingly. If you only sorted one column, per se, you just sorted that column, then all the data would be incorrect according to the first column. But when you use this filter mechanism, it allows you to sort clearly by what you want. Now, I can also sort by color, by the way, and there are other possibilities. So if I want to go by color, I can choose, okay, so I'm using the name field, yes. Cell value, what is it going to be? I'd like to cell color. We could have been the cell font color. So I'm going to say cell color. Now we have a darker blue, a lighter blue, a darker blue. So let's actually sort it by the color. And it says what color. Okay, so no cell color, or we want it to be on top. So let's just go. It looks like it may not see that color very well. It didn't see the color of the different cells. But if we had different colored cells here, it would actually do the same thing. So maybe I don't like it. Okay, I've got news for you. Sometimes I may find I don't like the blue. Maybe I want something else. The moment that this has become an actual table, it also means I now have a new tab at the top. And this tab is for tables. Now there's another way of changing the tables as well, and that is to format it here in styles. So I could actually choose I want a different color entirely. Or maybe I want the orange color with a band at the top, or I don't want any bands at the top, or I just want it to be gray colored, or I want a dark. And there's many different dark variations I can use here, or I can design my own, or I can use this table design tab, and I can go through the styles here as well and choose what I want. And there's a lot of different things I can turn on and turn off here as well. And it tells me the name of it, and I can actually create a new name for it. So I can actually name it and then use it in formulas. This is something that we'll talk about much later, but you don't always have to just select data. You can actually name that data as well. Give it an actual name and then use it inside of a formula instead of using the cell reference. So lots of different things are possible. The quick access toolbar is an excellent tool, really, really good tool that you can use to very quickly and very easily make modifications to your particular tables or your charts or any kind of information that you're actually preparing. And again, it will automatically create these for you. Now, these are just like templates, so you can still modify them once you create them. Piece of cake. Fantastic. So one more thing here. What if I wanted to print this? Once again, we talked about printing. I'm going to go to page layout for a moment. There's my page layout. And I've actually indicated before that you have this area within Excel, which allows you to print a very specific area as being the actual page itself. So whatever you select, now I don't want TripAdvisor, payroll calculation. All I want is the hours. So I'll choose that. And that's enough. However, you know, sometimes it's nice to have the gross pay as well. So I'll hold the control key down. Remember, we talked about this before. If I hold the shift key and I click at the last cell I want, it'll select everything in between. But if I hold the control key once I've selected something, I can then select more information. So I just want these two areas. Okay. And I'm going to set that print area. So this is the only thing that's going to print. There you go. And if I click away from it, I can actually see a little line, extra line around both sections. So both sections are now separate. And when I come up here, I can decide, do I want to print the lines around it? No, I don't. So I'm going to take those away, okay, when it comes to print. So neither one of them is going to print. And headings, do I want to have the A, B, C, D, 1, 2, 3? Probably not. Okay, so I can turn that off if I don't want it. So I'm going to print without those. I'm going to go over to File, and I'm going to go down to Print. And there it is right there. Now, this is one of the issues you can sometimes run into when there is space in between what you've selected. It may decide to put it on a second page. So at the bottom here, it says there are 2 pages. That's page number 2. That's page number 1. I want to put everything on the same page. So I can actually come in here and make some modifications. I'll change it to landscape. It's still got it on the other page, so I need to make some more adjustments here. I'll go to scaling for a moment. Actually, let's just go here to printed selection. Sorry, that's not what I want. Hold on. I come down here to scale. And in this case here, I can actually scale the document as well, fit it to 1 page if I want to. And also we can scale this a little bit. So customize. And in our case, we can now change this. So I may decide to modify the margins just a little bit for each page. Oops. Let's just take that up a bit. It might be easier if I do it the other way. Hold on. So I'm just going to come in here and hide these. By the way, you can hide columns as well. If I highlight the columns that I want to hide and then right click on it, I can then click on hide and it will hide that information. And then I can go in here again. We'll try this one a slightly different way. I still didn't like that, so I'll come back here and I'll reselect this. Okay, let's go back in here. And now it's in here. Okay, fantastic. And again, I can modify this a little bit. Let's just say I want to zoom it up a bit. So I can actually decide, wait a minute now, I'd like to adjust it. Let's make it 100 and let's make it 150. And it makes it larger still. So I can keep playing around with this. I can change the margins a little bit. It's a nice feature that you can actually select very specific columns that you want to print and not print the whole document. Because remember, the whole document here, I'm just going to unselect that. So I'll unhide. There you go. So all these columns are still there. I just hid them so that I could print just what I wanted to print as a selection. So we can print area, decide what we want to print, and it will print accordingly. And we can also print the titles if we want to print the titles. And this is also a very, very important element. And I want you to look at this carefully. It's telling me that I've selected the table. Okay, and that's what it's going to print. But it also tells me that there are other options here. And one of the ones I want you to pay attention to is at the bottom. And this says the direction of the print. Now, you may have a print document that has, let's say, page 1, where this table is, and then to its right-hand side is page 2. And then below it is page 3, and then, of course, beside that is page 4. But the problem is, if I print it the way it is here, down and then over, it'll print page 1, page 3, page 2, and then page 4. So if I wanted to print page 1 and page 2, then 3 and 4, I'd have to choose the second option, which goes sideways. So it'll print page 1, then page 2, then 3, and then 4. This is actually important, especially if you have hundreds of pages, because you may find it prints so out of balance that it takes you hours to put it all back together again. It's better to design it carefully. And the reason for that, once again, was, as I showed you before, we can actually see the pages, what the page happens to be. Now I'm going to modify this so that you can see it a little bit more clearly. Right now I've selected this area, so that's why the title is not in here. The title is grayed out, so it's not even part of the page number 1. So if I change that back again, and I'm just simply going to unselect this printed area, so clear it. And I can see the line here, which is the page reference. And if I come back in here, there we go. I can now move that along a little bit. So if I move that over, I now have page number 1 here, but I have page number 2 over here. And now there are actually 2 pages. So if page 1 is here and page 2 is here, then when I'm printing, I have to be very careful that I select all of this. And maybe I want to make it even larger still. And I can do that by just simply dragging it out. And now you notice it says page 1, page 2, page 3. And of course, we can copy that down a little bit, make it even larger. Now it says, wait a minute, hold on, page 1, page 2 below. So again, it really depends on how I intend to actually print this particular document. Because when I go to print it, I have to make sure that I'm printing it so that I'm getting the information that I'm trying to acquire, and to have it print in a very specific way. Fantastic. Oh, back here. So once again, deciding how it's going to go about the printing process is actually quite important when you're dealing with large spreadsheets, because as I showed you a moment ago, you can't see the whole document sometimes when you select it. It may actually be many hundreds of columns beyond this point. The header and the footer is another area which you have a lot of control over. Now, there are several ways of looking at this one as well. This is also the last thing we're going to talk about, but in this case here, I can decide to type in a custom header. And this would appear on different pages accordingly to this. Different on even and odd pages, or it might be different on just the first page. I can choose that as well. But I can click on custom and then simply type into all 3 of these. This is the same as the view I showed you before, where there are 3 columns at the top. We can type in anything I want. So if I wanted to put in, excuse me, the file, so now it'll actually fill this in. These are called fields, and it will automatically put in the field name. So if it will, let's say it's on the desktop, it'll put in desktop and the name of the file automatically. These are just fields that it will automatically fill in. And if I wanted to put in the page number, I could click on the right side here and I could click on page. So insert the actual page number, and whichever page it's printing, it'll automatically fill that in. Now, there's only one thing to remember, and I've told you this before on day number 1. I'm going to say it again, and I will say it again a few days from now. When you put a header or a footer in, and you are putting data in that's very long, that data will be overwritten. So if I actually have a file name that's really long with a path that is on, let's say, C drive inside of a folder, 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 inside of a folder with a name for a file that's quite long, it's going to stretch all the way across. Remember, it's going to print all the information right across the page. So this means that the name of the page will actually be printed on top of the file. It actually does print over itself, and it creates garbage. So if I put something in the middle here, like let's say the date, okay, it's going to put the date in automatically, or I put in a logo or something of that nature. Maybe I want to put a little logo in here, then it's going to print over it. The logo will print on top. This will print first, this will print second, this will print third. So you'll end up with garbage in the last two columns. Just keep that in mind, because that's something that a lot of people don't recognize right off the bat. And of course, there are very specific designs we can use as well. And that goes for the footer as well. So there are very specific ways of identifying that information. Of course, there are lots of options that are available. Again, this is because of the printer. So the printer will decide and define what you can do and what you can't do. And sheets, once again, how the sheets are set up, margins. If you want to change the spacing, maybe I have too much space here on the left-hand side. So I'll just reduce that a little bit. I'll take it down. There you go. Click OK, and it moves it all over for me. So if your printer can print that close to the edge and close to the top, then you can actually expand this a little bit and give yourself some more eye candy that you can see it more clearly. Piece of cake. Let's just go back here for a moment. There we go. I'm just going to jump back to my original view. Normality. Fantastic. Okay. So one last thing, and then I'm going to let you go. Yes, there is one last thing. Let's just take this down a little bit. Fantastic. There are many different things that you can do with your particular page. Sometimes you want to put in images in the background. Sometimes you want to put in other things that can be added to your particular document. The view can actually have many different elements within it. You can break the page apart, so to speak. We can decide to have different designs in our document as well. We'll talk about that, especially when it comes to ideas. We can actually use that as well. Inserting, we've talked about some of these things. We'll talk about some of the other ones here a little bit later. But there are some elements that can be added to a document. And one of those things is putting a picture in the background. You can actually put a picture in the background, but you need to be very careful when it comes to, let's say, printing, because your printer will try to print everything that happens to be in that particular document. I'm just quickly going through this very fast for you to show you each one of these tabs. Fantastic, good show. And the last one here as well, insert and home. Okay, so let's just put a picture in the background. Again, on the page layout, because this deals with the whole page, I'm going to put a background picture. And I'm going to grab it from a file, let's say from Bing. I'll grab Bing. Oh, I like that, airplanes. Fantastic. Be nice if they had a nice picture of an airplane. No nice pictures. What kind of cheap thing is this? Oh, there you go. We'll grab that one. Well, let's... Yeah, that's a nice one. Let's take that one. So now I have a picture in the background, and we can still see the rectangles here. So we can see all of these cells, and we can still actually put something in. But you know something, this is difficult to see. It really is. And you definitely want to make sure that the font color is going to be appropriate. So if I type in 123 and then I press tab to accept that value, we can just barely see what's here. I may have to bold it even. Yeah, and I may have to make it a little bit larger, which also means that the picture changes as well. So sometimes having a picture in the background is not the best thing to do. When we go to print it, for instance, we'll have a choice what we actually include within that particular picture. Let me just go back here. Yeah, it's not including it because I've turned off the pictures in the background. But you can actually print that picture as well, and it will take up as much ink as you have in your printer. That's the nasty part about using either Word or using Excel or PowerPoint or any of them, that if there's color, it's going to use it up as quickly as possible. So you can actually, by using the layout, put a picture in here. So if you have a picture of your kids, you can put a picture of your kids in as well. Let's see what we have here from a file. I wonder if I have any pictures. I had to rebuild my computer because it died. So I'm not sure if I have anything left. Doesn't look like it. Oh, pictures here. I got nothing. Well, that's a ripoff. There's no pictures. Hey, hold. What's in hold? Pictures. There's no pictures. Okay, so there's no pictures on there.
How about an online picture?
Oh, yes, we can take your picture. There we go.
No, online picture.
We need a crazy person.
This is what happens, Jane, when you give suggestions.
There you go. 3 crazy people.
Oh, goodness.
Fantastic. And I'm just going to save that. So save as, and we'll call it crazy people. And we'll save that. We don't want a PDF, we want an image. So let's take a GIF.
Hopefully you're using Joyta's picture today.
GIF is okay. There we go. Where did I save it? I guess it would help to know that, wouldn't it? I saved it in Excel. That's useful. Let me just save it to the desktop. Crazy people. There we go. So let's put a picture in here from a file. And I want the desktop. And I just can't find the crazy people. Oops. Well, that's neat. We have lost the crazy people. There you go. Ay, ay, ay. Huh. Well, I still have to work on this machine. Anyhow, you get the idea. You can add a picture in here at any given moment. I wonder if this one has it. Since I just saved it, it should actually be there. I guess not. Too bad, so sad. So are there any questions so far about what we've covered this morning? Fantastic. Okay, so what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to go over to Cengage. And in Cengage is a brand new training. Make sure that you are sticking with your training and that you are going through it meticulously. But also keep in mind that your projects are due and that you also have another project. And you want to stay on top of them because after looking at the word course, a few of you missed a couple. And that's a significant mark. It really is a very large mark, and you don't want to lose those marks. So you want to stay on top of them. I know that some of you have children. Try eBay. If you have children, you can buy a leash or whatever you need. But you sometimes you get so many interruptions. It's really difficult for you. I realize that. But if you're not staying on top of these, you're losing very significant marks. And some of those marks are really quite high. You might be losing 20 or 30%, and that can really make a difference. So you want to definitely spend some time on those projects and get them done ASAP. The other thing is on the third day after the training, you always have a quiz for the previous 2 days. So always keep that in mind and be working towards it so that you can actually continue. When you take on the projects, just remember, take it step by step by step. Don't be in a hurry to kind of rush through it as fast as possible, because that's when you don't recognize what you're supposed to be doing. So take it step by step and just take it easy. Don't try to rush through it, as I just said. Make sure you do the training first before you do the project, because it will help you with that project. And what we talk about will help you as well. And those videos, by the way, for each day, and I'm just about to terminate the one that I have now, those videos will actually help you a great deal as well.